right? And this, what does this slide mean? That even when we have the same education, the same experience, right, and the same job, we are still devalued. I see this as a value, the value of black people compared to the value that they place on other people, right? And so this is the important part that we have to continue to look at.
We'll get to that. We're just seeing we're situating where we are right now. Should we continue? Thank you for that analysis. A little bit, people are always interested in transportation across the country, so across the state, so it's always important to see where folks fall. Next slide. Sacramento County, this gives you an idea of what percentage of folks don't have access to their own vehicles. And again, if you connect the folks that are not working, some of that reason is they don't have transportation to get to jobs that might be far, so everything is all really interconnected, right? If you think the majority of folks in the city here, black folks, don't have access to their cars. Next slide. And it's a little bit higher in the city, so it's 12% in the city. Okay. Next slide. Next slide. And this just looks at a place of birth composition for black folks. So in California, it gives you an idea of folks that are foreign born, folks that are born out of state, so born in New York and they moved to California, for example, or folks that are homegrown, born here. So this just gives you an idea of the breakdown for black folks, right? And by age at the bottom. Next, this is Sacramento County, this is Sacramento City. And then this is tied to their education. All right, the fun slides. Homeownership in California. The orange is black folks, gone down over the years, which is no surprise to people, right? Sacramento. Could you go back to the county? Sacramento County in 2000. 40% of folks were homeowners in 2021, and in Sacramento it's 17%. So as you think about the next 10, 20 years, what are the jobs that black folks are future ready for? 17% of us are ready. Next slide. Digital divide, next slide. This slide makes me a little sad. It is depressing, isn't it? And people say, it's not, how is this race related? The data is giving us the story, right? We're not making these numbers up. Digital divide, folks with the kids in their home, 33% of black folks don't have access to the internet. And we saw a lot of that during the pandemic. Next slide. Digital divide and living below the poverty line, even higher. Right, next slide. Share of parents that are living with folks under 5. This is from the first 5 data. For black folks, it's the orange bar is one parent present, the yellow bar is both parent present, and the gray bar, no parents. So you can just get an idea of how folks are living in California. Again, this slide is just California. Next slide. And this is the Sacramento County slide. So, I mean, the experiences that children are having in the city, right? White children, Asian American children with 2-parent households versus black parents household, or, or versus Native American households. It's very different. Next slide. Next slide. So just wanted to offer, I know we're going to spend a lot of time on this, but just wanted to offer some data on the share of black immigrants in California. So in California, it's about 4%. Wait, I'm sorry, go back. It's not 4%, it's all of them. That's all the percentages from 1990 to 2021. And on the left side is the Sacramento number. So quite a lot of folks here that are immigrants, right? Next slide. Immigrants with children living with at least one immigrant parent in Sacramento on the left, about 11%, and in California it's about almost 15%. Next slide. So the things that I find resiliency in the Black growth for the next few years, in the last few years have been really high in some of the cities outside of LA. You can see, and I thought it was important for you all to see a few cities together, right? So the LA Black population definitely declining. It's getting too expensive to live in LA, so folks are moving out. A lot of folks are moving to Riverside. A lot of folks are moving to San Joaquin, and there's a good amount of folks moving to Sacramento. So that also, in answer to Dr. Jackson's question, folks are being pushed out of expensive cities, and they're finding other cities to move to. Next slide. And then the other thing that's resilient is that, the median income household with children has gone up significantly over the years. I think that's something to be proud of. I'm not really sure if it's because of the types of jobs that folks are moving into. The thing I didn't point out in the slide around jobs is the top 3 jobs that folks are working here in Sacramento is healthcare. And I have another slide which didn't get into the PowerPoint if anybody wants to talk to me about it after. Healthcare is 36%, construction is 18%, and protective services. Those are the top 3 occupations that Black folks are employed in Sacramento. Next slide. And then there's quite a bit of thriving organizations here. These are just a couple of samples that I put up, and you'll hear from some of them in the panel later. And that's it. Thank you. Next slide. That's my information. If you have any questions, again, you will be emailed the PowerPoint, and we can answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We wanted to make sure, again, that we not only just talk about what the state of our village is, but we particularly wanted to make sure that we also gave a local context, because many of these things are also things that we hope that when you look at, you leave here deciding on or thinking about, right, which part of this data are you going to work on here locally, right? It takes all of us picking and looking at what the data is that is concerning to us, what is our individual expertise, and particularly organizations or even individually, to say, what is your action plan to help move this forward, right? These things just don't happen. These things we have to have strategies around these things, right? So think about it. What are you going to work on in your community that you're going to band together with other Black folks to be able to move the needle on these issues? Let's go to the next slide here. So the California Legislative Black Caucus is the largest amount that we've ever had, actually. And as you saw through the numbers, is that our numbers are growing in the Black Caucus because we're also representing non-traditional Black communities as well, right? We are representing non-majority Black districts as well. But what does that mean also? And just to think about this, because I remember when we were in the debate about who the governor should appoint to take then U.S. Senator Kamala Harris's U.S. Senate seat, right? And we were talking about, well, what is our chances of having statewide black representation. But if you think about it, we actually have 4 statewide black elected officials, constitutional officers. 3, actually. 3 out of 6 or 7. Now think about this. What is the percentage of California's black population? About 5–6%. We represent almost 50% of all the statewide offices. Right? When you look at the number of state legislators, there are 12 of us. What does that mean? That means that our community continues to punch above its weight. We continue to make a way out of no way, right? And we continue to find ways, and not only that, we're holding it down, and no matter where we live, we are stepping up to be seen as leaders in our own and other communities throughout the state of California. So that's something to be proud of. And the type of work, and of course, as always, our black women continue to lead the way, right? Continue to lead the way. And so you see all of us that are members of the Black Caucus from, and there are some first-timers as well, in terms of our current chair right now, Lori Wilson's the first African-American to be elected in her region. I'm the first African-American to be elected in Riverside County. We have others throughout the state as well, coming from places like Pasadena. Places, of course, we always continue to, we're glad to get that representation, the black representation in Alameda and Oakland as well. But Sacramento having black representation. But overall, the idea is that we have an opportunity to continue to think about. And sometimes what we say to ourselves is this. Sometimes we say, oh, you don't have a chance to win. We don't have enough numbers. They're not going to elect a black person. That actually hasn't been true. And sometimes that's what we tell each other, right? And so we've got to stop feeding into that narrative because we are defying that narrative every single time. Next slide. So let's talk about reparations and how the Legislative Black Caucus is beginning to define reparations, not just in terms of the state of California, but most importantly also to our colleagues in the state legislature as well. Next slide. So we knew that after the murder of George Floyd, we as a community really ignited an international movement, right? And to be able to even give us and members of the Legislative Black Caucus, I wasn't there during that time, but it gave members of the Legislative Black Caucus during that time to take advantage of the movement to begin to move us forward. Next slide. Which is why Dr. Shirley Weber, now our Secretary of State, introduced the AB 3121 to create the task force on reparations. And it was a 2-year process to be able to do it. And I'm sure many of you participated in those hearings throughout the state as well. Next slide. And these were the current members, these were the past members of that task force. Next slide. Now, man, if you have, has anyone read the report? Who's read the report? Awesome, right? If you haven't, we ask you to at least read the executive summary. It is a history book. not just recommendations, about what California, again, what California skillfully, strategically marginalized and oppressed Black folks. How they intentionally and systematically kept our people in slavery for as long as possible. And once one barrier was eliminated, how they erected other barriers to continue to slow down our progress. And so this has become really a sacred document to the Legislative Black Caucus that for those who participated in the ceremony where the task force passed on those recommendations to the Legislative Black Caucus to begin to get to work. Next slide. And if you want to look at all the hearings and the research and all those things, you can go to this to actually begin to even do your own research in regards to how the recommendations were put together. Next slide. And so the final report was done in June the 29th in 2023. And again, the report really has some very detailed recommendations and the facts that back them up. The final report also outlines the formal, why we should have a formal apology, why we should have a formal acknowledgement as well. And then also lays out the actual formulas for calculations of monetary compensation and restitution, depending on what your lineage encompass. So it's not just one big formulation. It's actually bits of different areas, right? Maybe your descendants had land that was stolen from them, right? Whether it's through eminent domain or through racial terror. Maybe your ancestors lived in areas of redlining, right? Maybe your ancestors were a part of mass incarceration. Whatever it is, there are different formulas for that to be able to come to a dollar amount. Next. And it has the outline. And even if you look at the table of contents, is already a history lesson. Right? Look at that. And many a times, that's why we have to, sometimes we don't even know to the extent that California went, right, to continue to oppress our people and our Native American brothers and sisters as well. Next slide. So this is what's important to know, right? That reparations has three parts to it. First is the acknowledgement. Yes, we did some stuff to you, right? And it is a fact. Then is the apology. We did some stuff to you, so we want to apologize for that and pledge that we will not do it again. Why is the apology important? Has someone actually got on your nerves and got you upset and you couldn't feel right until they apologized? Until they acknowledged that yes, they hurt you And then, yes, they apologize for it, right? There's the acknowledgement, and the apology is actually part of the healing process. Because reparations is also about making sure that you are being healed through that. And many times, and we all know this, right? The amount of racial stress that we go through every day. The amount of historical trauma that we have to continue to work through. It's important that the state of California actually helps in the healing process as well. And then there's the atonement. And the atonement also has two pieces to this. The atonement is currently, for those who are descendants of chattel slavery, we are going to make it right with you. The second part of atonement also, though, is, and we're going to make sure that there are no systems and there's no laws that will harm your future generations as well. You get that? Not only what the state will do to atone for us, but what atonement will be made to making sure that our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren won't have the same experiences and won't have to fight systems and fight laws, right, that will eliminate any or even stop any progress that can be made in the first place. That part is important too. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So this is a part of our campaign to restore Black California for all Californians. It is a historical fact. When you remove barriers for Black folks, you actually are removing barriers for a lot of other folks. Right? And if we are going to continue to be a large part of this state, that everyone has to have the ability to thrive. Because if we don't thrive, California doesn't thrive. Right? Next slide. Absolutely. Right? Next slide. Since 2022, right, this is what we have been doing along the way, of course, through the groundbreaking work of Dr. Shirley Weber. Next slide. We already talked about the reparations report. Next slide. Right, and we've already talked about some of this in terms of the data. When you just look at the median net worth of our folks compared to our white counterparts. Next slide. Right? And now also we have to make sure that, again, we have to hit, when we talk about reparations, we have to hit a slew of issues. A slew of issues when it comes to safety, when it comes to health, when it comes to education, when it comes to career opportunities, right? When it comes to appreciable assets and family legacy. Again, when you look at the report, it hits a whole number of issues, okay? And it's a lot. It's a lot, right? Which means that from any given year, there's not enough bandwidth to try to get all the recommendations done. We have to keep nipping at it every single year. This is a multi-year strategy that we are embarking on. Next. 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 again, uncovering some more data in terms of what we're facing here in California. And these are the things that we have to even educate, not just our Republican colleagues who have practically unanimously always voted against our work, but also even our Democratic colleagues who simply just don't know the history, right? And so we have to take the time out to educate them so that they even know what the institution that we serve in Sacramento, right, has done to black folks. Next. Next. Right, we talked about it when we saw the work, when the data, when we talked about even when we have the same education and experience. Next. Next. And then this is just a time that, again, you'll be able to get access to this presentation, but the idea, right, that as what has the task force unveiled to us in such a very, very systematic, organized, and professional way. Next. So how do we restore all the harm that has been done? Next. All right. How we restore it is through our reparations work. Next slide. So much of it is how do we close the racial wealth gap caused by the atrocities of slavery, right? And systemic racism for the future of California. Next. 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 All right. And so now the idea is, well, what are we doing to get to work? Next slide. So it's important to know that this year was our inaugural year of beginning to get the recommendations of the task force enacted. And this year we strategically decided as a group what were the initial steps we needed to take to making sure that even the most difficult and controversial things that are within the task force recommendations, right? It'll make it easier to get through because we took the time to educate people. We took the time to build coalitions within the legislature to get it done. And we took the time to even work and get commitments from the governor and our leadership as well of both houses. So the first thing that we needed to do was educate legislators, which is why our first two pieces of legislation was to first, through Dr. Akilah Weber, was to have a formal acknowledgement of the state of California of what we've always knew has happened. And then ensuring through Assemblymember Reggie Jones Sawyer's bill to make sure that we have a formal apology. Now we could have done a resolution, right? That doesn't take very much. But we decided to make sure that they were bills so that we would have a governor's signature, right? To making sure that even every aspect of leadership of the state of California was a part of the process of codifying, of making it a matter of historical documentation of what California has done, and also the type of apology that has been made. And then begin to eliminate some of the legal barriers to achieve even greater reparations. Right, y'all remember Prop 209, right? And Prop 209 is alive and well. alive and well. That's in our state constitution. So what does that mean? We have to have legislation to take it out of the Constitution so that we can get Black-specific programs enacted. All right? So now we talk about and then also we have to navigate the state budget, right? And of course, just our luck, we had a horrible state budget this year that we had to navigate through. But even through that process, we were able to get some commitments from leadership to help pave the way for the future. Okay? And then we wanted to make sure that we got some early wins, because what you may not know is when you're going through this process, you never know how members are going to react. You never know what type of issues will pop up during the process. So we had to make sure that when we introduced the bills that we actually knew and we would actually learn this year so that we can actually continue to get more aggressive even next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. Right? Next. So we introduced a number of bills in terms of our initial reparations package. Right? We also had we also made sure that we had AB, what was that? Assembly constitutional amendment, right, to get slavery out of a part of our Constitution, right? And that's going to be on the November ballot this year, right? The November ballot this year, okay? And so, again, well, you're going to get copies of this slide, so we'll send it to you, okay? And so we had a number of bills. Next slide. So this is what we've been able to achieve thus far. Right now, currently signed by the governor is ACA 7, again, involuntary servitude. Again, we have also AB 628, rehabilitation services in CDCR. We have Assemblymember McKenna's bill in terms of expanding career technical education. On the governor's desk right now, and of course he has until the end of this month to see what he will, which reparation bills he will sign. Okay. SB 1050 from Bradford, which talks about racially motivated eminent domain. How do we continue to look at and give people an opportunity to have land restored back to them? SB 1089, the food and prescription access, grocery and pharmacy closures, making sure we're protecting and expanding and eliminating food deserts. Right? AB 1815, discrimination, race in terms of hairstyles, expanding on the Crown Act. Right? AB 1975, by Assemblymember Bonta, doing in terms of Medi-Cal, supporting food, making sure that we're supporting more food and nutrition to making sure that our folks are happy, are healthy. AB 1986, talking about book bans in state prisons. AB 3089, talking about the formal apology. And then, of course, AB 3131, which is California Career Technical Education grant programs as well. All of these are recommendations and the task force's recommendations, right? All of these is a part of implementing reparations. And so one thing we have made sure that we've done is that every year, if it's a part of the reparations task force recommendations, right? Every year we look through them all and see what is the best, which ones we should be moving forward with every single year, all right? Things that didn't make it through the process, of course I have ACA 7 to begin to chip away at Prop 209. We decided to hold that this year because number one, we had to raise a whole lot of money, and there was some issues before Biden dropped out of the election that we were that we were worried about. But we are dedicated to getting that on the 2026 ballot. Also, AB 2064, violence prevention, AB 2280, the Mandela Act in terms of solitary confinement, and then AB 2862, when we talk to professional licensures to making sure that our folks get greater access and eliminate barriers to getting professional licenses, right? Again, all of this, now, as we always talk about, and we know that there's a whole lot of recommendations, right? A whole lot of recommendations. And every year we have to come together as a caucus to decide which ones are the best to move forward with, right? Are we all going to agree from one year to the next? No, we're not, right? But we're trying to move consistently in solidarity as one people in the legislature to do this. And the reason why we are coming into various communities is because before we start talking about what the next package should look like, we want to give you an opportunity to submit your priorities so that we can take those into account as well, right? Now, is everybody's voice important? Absolutely. Many times we have the debate, right? Who had the best strategy? Was it Martin Luther King? Was it Malcolm X? Was it the Black Panthers, right? And when history is written, the answer is all of them. All of them are important. All of their strategies were important. Everyone fulfilling their role was important, right? So should we continue to have people, have our people who are advocating and continuing to push us to do even more and to be bolder? Absolutely. That's a part of the process. And it's needed in this movement, right? Do we need people working on the inside to try to find out the best strategy and to work the inside game? Absolutely. All of them is very important, right? And so we must continue to find ways. And the reason why we're going up and down the state is because we need even more people to get involved, right? Even more people to get involved so that when we see other folks in the legislature who are not giving us the votes that we need to get something passed, we can activate even those people and educate them and let them know that their own representative is not in favor of any particular piece of our reparations package. Next. All right. So now we're going to bring up Mark up here to be able to do some Q&A, right? This is Q&A portion. And looking forward to your questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand so we can get you your cards. If you have cards, there'll be people to collect them as well. Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jackson. We have lots of questions that will be collected because these are important to get to, and I just want to dive in. These are about some of the bills that were lost in this last legislative session. These are also addressed to Mr. McCarty, who is not here right now, so I'll just address them to you, Dr. Jackson, and Assemblymember Bonta. I'm just reading these verbatim, so please forgive me. Do you, Mr. McCarty and Mr. Jackson, understand the confusion and frustration felt by these bills not being brought to the floor?
Absolutely. I do understand it. I actually feel the same way. And I believe that this year, again, has taught us some important lessons as well. One of the important lessons that this has really taught us is to make sure. I don't know.
Get a sound check on this mic over here. There's another one.
Is
The
the
question was asked, why was the bill not brought to the floor?
Why did you stop the bill from going to the floor, Corey?
That wasn't actually the question.
I got it. I have a series of questions that he prepared. I'm trying to get to them. Just a second, please.
Any other questions?
Don't tell me a story, like, he was asking for me a question.
So this is, so what we have learned is the need to making sure that, again, we're moving in solidarity. But absolutely, there is no doubt that we understand the frustrations and anger that occurred.
You didn't answer the question, sir. You didn't answer the question, sir.
The question that I heard and that
Why did you stop the bill?
First, this is not what we're going to do, all right? So, no, it's not what we're going to do. No, it's not what we're going to do, all right? So we're going to do this, the right way, all right? And that is, we're going to ask the questions and we're going to answer the questions,
You didn't answer
okay?
the question. You didn't
And
answer
if
the
you cannot,
question.
if you can't follow that, all right, then we're not going to do it. So you want to ask the question again, Mark, so that everyone can hear exactly what we were asked?
The questions that Mr. Marvell Wilson has typed on this page, the first one is, do you, Mr. McCarty and Mr. Jackson, understand the confusion and frustration felt by these bills not being brought to the floor?
Absolutely.
You didn't answer the question, though.
I will answer the question because I think it was addressed to all three of us. I do understand the frustration and the confusion. For me, there are a couple pieces of this. One is, as we were looking at the data, and also the reparations package, and the evolution of the reparations task force work, the fact that there were 115 recommendations made, that is a lot of work to be able to think about moving forward, 115 recommendations. There was no initial conversation about how we would proceed as a community to be able to have 115 recommendations coming out of the task force addressed. We, as a caucus, were able to sit down and think through what the implications were of being handed 115 recommendations at the time, in the middle of a session, first of all. In the middle of a huge budget deficit for the state, and in the middle of incredible urgency, because this has been work that has been building up for 2 years, more than that, obviously, but around this reparations task force work for 2 years, where there was a need and a call for immediate response. So where I believe the frustration and some of the confusion comes from was not having a collective conversation about how we would execute on all of those recommendations from the task force, what and how we would prioritize that, and whether or not we would take an approach that would exclusively focus on direct cash payments, or whether we focus on a broader strategy to address some of the systemic bias and racism that underlies the wealth gap that we experience. So for me, I think a lot of the confusion and, well, I should say the frustration comes from the fact that we were not collectively aligned on what our strategy would be. And I will say that we were not, as a community, collectively aligned. And I will quite frankly say that I don't think that as a caucus, we were collectively aligned around that.
Thank you. I'm just gonna get to the rest of the questions that Mr. Marvell Wilson provided. Can you help us understand why neither of you brought or seconded those bills? It says, can you help us understand why neither of you brought or seconded those bills? Do you, is
SB
that?
1331 and SB 1403.
I will answer that question.
You had 1331, you were the floor manager for 1331.
I was the floor manager
You had
for
your job to bring it
1331.
up. Why did you not bring the bills up? And why did you vote against bringing the bills up?
Yes. In your internal.
You gotta let her respond. I mean,
Thanks. I fundamentally believed that we were going to be moving as a caucus around all of the package of bills, the reparations package of bills. When there was misalignment around whether or not the full package of bills would get moved forward, and that, by the way, just also involves the kinds of amendments that needed to be made to the bills. We checked in with each other on those amendments, on many of those bills, on what they would look like when we brought them to the floor, and whether or not we believed that we would be successful in getting them signed. I, as a legislator, am not a big fan of putting out false promises to community. So in my individual, I'm trying to answer the question, so please.
But a bill for Medi-Cal is
Please
okay.
give me the space to be able to do that.
Keep interrupting, we won't be able to.
Please give me the space to be able to do that. So when we have an opportunity to be able to put forward legislation, I never personally put forward legislation that I know doesn't have a chance at moving through the process, at representing the full intention of the policy behind it, and ultimately having a good shot at getting signed by the governor. So,
But couldn't the Congress override them?
no, okay, so that's a great, I will, can I just answer that question?
Yes,
So part of this is, where did we start?
supermajority
We
Democrats.
started with 80 people in the assembly not being willing to vote yes on acknowledging the need for reparations. We started with not 80 legislators not being willing to acknowledge and agree to apologize. So we start from a place of what do we know is right and what do we know we can do? And we go through the legislative process, basically having to manage that. And in some instances, we get personally disappointed, our communities get disappointed, because we put forward things that we know are right, but don't get signed. And around such a monumental thing for me, as reparations, and setting up the structure for ensuring that we could do that through the Freedoms Bureau or having the fund to be able to do that, I don't believe that in this moment in time, either of those things were going to get signed by the governor. So why did I personally?
That's crazy. That's crazy. I'm sorry.
I appreciate that you believe that that is crazy, but that is my belief.
That is such a bad answer.
You don't want to answer the question?
That's such a bad answer.
But it's still an answer, I
But it's
think.
bad. And
And
it's
so,
unacceptable.
I would say this also, it was also the timing as well. Because we were at the point in the legislative process where after the rules were, like at this time, there's not going to even be, the process doesn't even allow for amendments on bills. And by the time that we heard that there was an issue with the bill, we couldn't even amend it at that point in the first place. And so that just means to us that means that we couldn't do the negotiations that you would need to do in this part of the process with the governor's office. And so because we've learned from that process, right, now next year when we introduce it, we will have an opportunity to actually engage before we actually gavel in even in the next session as well. And so, I mean, a lot of it was the timing part as well in terms of when we heard that there was an issue with it. The fact that many of us didn't even know that there was an issue until the last minute as well. And we made a commitment together because it's also important to know this when you're dealing with the legislature. And that is that there are ebbs and flows when it comes to what is possible. And we did not want to, and again, we still haven't finished our discussions about exactly, number one, exactly where the Freedmen's Bureau should actually be housed, at what level of government it should be housed in, making sure that we fully consider what powers it should be given, right? And it was so late in the process that we wouldn't even be able to have those thoughtful conversations, because once you do it, that's what we get. And we have got to make sure that we go about doing it the right way.
Thank you.
$6 million
Our-
to California Freedmen Fund is okay. And $6 million to Sac State to further study when lineage has already been recommended is okay. You're okay with that?
And the time to do amendments is January, February, March, April, May, June, July, not the day the bill's supposed to come up.
So
If you
here's,
had amendments, bring the amendments in January, bring them in the committees, bring them in the policy committees.
hold on
Don't bring them-
a second,
come
hold on a second. I made a
I'm sorry.
commitment, I made a commitment
May I ask
to
a
y'all.
question?
I made
Yeah,
a
I just wanna, I fully understand
You
the
recommended
passion.
a bill for Medi-Cal. I do not.
I fully
A
understand.
universal policy, we have all
Ma'am,
that.
are we gonna
data.
have you talk
I
and
know,
me talk, or are we
all
gonna
of
engage in
that data
conversation?
that shows
Go ahead.
That should not have happened. You recommended a policy for Medi-Cal.
So
That
we
is not-
outlined what the rules
It's
are.
time to listen.
And so, no, what's going to do is it's time to follow the process that we've established. And if we can't follow that process, if we cannot follow that process, then we will adjourn. Okay? And now we want to get to everyone's questions, which is why we have a process. And there's many other people who have questions as well that we want to get to. All right? So what's going to happen is we're going to read the questions, we're going to answer them. You may not like our answers, and that's fine, right? But we're going to answer them, but we're going to continue to move forward.
Is this about you or is this about us?
I've made a commitment
I'm not gonna
to
give you a reason to.
all of you to get to your questions. I'm trying to do that, but I can't do it if you don't want that to happen.
Yes, but.
And it sounds like,
Proceed.
okay, I'm just, our suspicion is that a greater power influenced you to not vote on these bills. Could that be true?
I would say no.
Is it true that you both have voted yes on these bills prior to the last assembly? If so, why did you vote yes?
The last assembly, this was the first bill that was brought up. Particularly, no, I never had an opportunity to vote on any bills, particularly those two bills throughout the process, no.
Okay, all right. What needs to be done to make SB 1403 a bill that can be voted on?
As I said before, we are going to reintroduce it next year, and we are going to begin talking with the governor's office, talking with leadership, to making sure that we have these discussions from the very beginning, so that when we introduce it, it's actually something that we have all the parties aligned on. And so, again, we're about to actually start the process of scheduling meetings now to begin to work on it.
Thank you.
This time,
Since
make
the
sure you
movement
involve
for-
the community.
can I just follow up on a little bit on that, please?
Listen.
So, you alluded to it a minute ago about the affairs committee needing to be the house, how the structure of the affairs office should be. Could you speak to maybe what needs to be done to make it what you want, just what you might want to see it as? That's kind of some more concrete,
Can I jump in
or
on that?
however, yeah, whomever.
I'll jump in on that. So I have an open question. This is a legit open question. So right now, California has an implementation problem. We will pass over 1,000 bills this year. Just this year.
Bureaucracy of
This year. All of those, the legislature has oversight over. We get informed by whether or not those bills are being implemented with assistance from the legislative analyst office. Corey sits on budget. I sat on budget last year, a subcommittee of that budget chaired that. And I chaired the public safety, where I would have conversations with CDCR about whether or not they were implementing legislation that we would pass. And I would sit there, hearing after hearing, and feel like I was talking to the wind. Because I would, as a legislator with oversight authority, I would ask questions, I would proactively go out and say, hey, have you done X, Y, and Z? And in those hearings, we would get crickets, we would get, we'll get back to you, we would get flat out, no, we didn't do it. That's an implementation challenge for me. So right now, with the structure that we have in place, with the legislature with oversight authority, with a legislative analyst office that is outnumbered 1 to 10 with the Department of Finance, we have very limited, unfortunately, capacity to hold people to account on the legislation that we pass. And we always struggle with implementation. So, Freedmen Affairs Bureau. The idea that we would have an isolated unit of government with not lack of clarity around, to Dr. Jackson's point, where that Freedmen Affairs Bureau would have authority in the executive branch, potentially, raises questions for me. I want clarity around that. I want to have insight into what the legislative authority over time would be related to that aspect of work. I also have questions about how effective an individual bureau would be in being able to interact with and have oversight authority over other agencies. A lot of this implementation work actually happens in those 115 recommendations, happens in the Department of Health or Housing or Social Services. So without us having clarity and being very explicit in the legislation how the Freedmen Affairs Bureau would interact with and what authority they would have over other agencies, for me, it's an incomplete proposition. And so that's one of the aspects that through amendment, through making sure that legislative intent is articulated, we have an opportunity to make that piece of legislation stronger, so that we're building a very strong foundation that has lasting power.
Thank you.
And there might be times, that there might be also times that they are proposing amendments that would ensure that it gets passed. So we might not be sure we want it to pass after certain minutes, right? And so we have to make sure, there's a whole lot of gamesmanship, there's a whole lot of things that happens through the process, that if we don't set this up right, and we allow it to be passed, and it doesn't have all the right powers, it doesn't have all the right accountability measures, right, that won't be, now remember, this agency could be set up, and it's not accountable to nobody but the governor, and whoever the governor is at the time, right? Which means that even when we have questions or concerns, right, if we don't set it up correctly, then now we have something that symbolically is acting on our behalf, but it actually may be counterproductive as well. And so the whole point of all this is just to say this, is that we have to sit down and we have to even debate and critique even each other's ideas to making sure that it's something that we've thought of as many possibilities as possible, but also think about any intended consequences as possible as well.
Why did you do all this amendments talk in the committees, January, February, March, April, May? Where was these concerns when you had the opportunity to bring them up in the committee process? Why kill the bill the day the bill's supposed to come up? Why raise these concerns the days the bills are supposed to come up?
Right,
And why put your name on as a co-author of the bill if you have all these concerns? You are co-author of 1403. You are a co-author of 1403.
Again, we've asked.
Wrote it.
You did have a question. You did have a question first, yeah.
Right, now that you guys have spoken, I kind of understand your position. I kind of understand where you're coming from. However, the entities that you want to set up, you want to make sure that the entities don't collapse or the government steps in and tries to take over or bans it. I understand that. But on the other hand, if you set up an outside entity to come in and co-manage everything, the same thing that happened 400 years ago is going to happen within that, because you're having other nationalities to handle our situation. We as African Americans know what we've been through and how and where and when. Only we know that. And if you're going to set up an entity to do the work that is supposed to be done and that the government is not going to override you, you need African Americans in those high positions to make sure that we get what we are asking for. Do you understand? That's all I'm saying. Because that fear of going back, that fear of the other entity coming in and telling us, no, we're going to give you only $100 because that's all you deserve. That fear is great in our minds. We are already stressed out. We have pain. We have suffered. There is so much when you wake up in the morning that you have to go out and face. I face racism every day. There's not a day I don't go out that someone crosses my path and I see it, I feel it, and I hear it. And this is what we are trying to stop. We're saying, America, you've done what you have done. Own up to it. Now give us something in return for all of our despair. That's all we're asking for.
I feel the pain.
Get out the way
It's
of that.
lineage specific,
Don't be
not
in the way
class
of that.
specific.
Can I get to the next
90% of
set
the
of
people
questions?
she's talking about
Can I
is
get to the
lineage.
next-
All right, let's go on to the next question.
So the state of Black California, there's a question about youth education as well as how to improve test scores. And I believe that this question is trying to get at how do we ensure young people have some of this education, as well as questions about the concern for Black youth and their test scores, which I'm assuming presumes that they may be falling.
Well, specifically, I mean, the data is clear. We began to get at some of that when we had our last negotiation with the governor to try to figure out how we can continue to improve education for our children. We know for sure that even in the same schools, that our children are not getting even the same education as some of their fellow students in the very same school. And so we continue to try to find ways to include more accountability into the local control funding formula. We continue to try to find ways to, as a matter of fact, I think on the governor's desk, they're finally getting rid of K violations in terms of suspensions. In terms of what Senator Skinner it's really been her career work in the legislature for a lot of things in terms of instead of suspensions. But overall, what we think we're going to need to do is even go a little bit outside the system and create some greater supports to empower community to help fill in some of those gaps. These institutions are just not moving the way we need them to for our young people. And it's actually been very, 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 very frustrating for us as we continue to bring it up with the governor, as we continue to bring it up in committees and even in the bills that we introduce. But it is going to continue to be a long journey and a long fight to get this done.
I have two questions for you, Dr. Tabari. I'm just going to ask you to come on up while I answer one question that I know I have a response to, which is, what is the state of California doing to ensure the 1,100-page report of the state's harm is being taught in California school systems? We've partnered with the Department of Justice, who has commissioned two researchers to develop a curriculum based on the task force report. We funded that work along with DOJ, and the outcome will be a curriculum that will be acceptable for the ethnic studies requirement. In addition to educators being a part of that process where they're creating the curriculum, there are also community advocates and organizers so that the curriculum can be used in public education settings such as this. So that is one response to that. And if our members would like to offer anything else on that, I'm happy to hear from you. Okay, so Dr. Tabari.
No, that was for you all.
Yeah, but I have two questions for you, which is why you should probably come up so you have the mic. One is, to what extent?
I got a mic.
Oh, okay, perfect. To what extent is the lack of income for Black folks with bachelor's degrees a result of lack of higher education for Black men?
Say that again? Repeat the question.
To what extent is the lack of income for Black folks with bachelor's degrees a result of lack of higher education for Black men?
I don't know if we can pull out higher education for Black men or women. I mean, statistically, Black women are getting higher education degrees at a much higher rate than Black men, that's just statistically, but I don't think it's a correlation of why folks aren't being paid. I don't think the two, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 in this sense, right? I think that there's lots of reasons why folks with a degree are not getting paid a higher salary, particularly Black folks, and it boils down to racism, it boils down to discrimination, it boils down to structural racism in more cases. If you're on a team where you all have the same degrees, chances are the Black person is probably making less than everybody else, and that's just structurally how that's designed. So we have to be really intentional when folks have a degree to say, you know, I have a bachelor's degree, I have a master's degree, and I'm really expecting to make X amount of dollars. And I could tell you, when I'm hiring people that are not Black, they're often asking for more than we're offering. And if I'm hiring a Black person, they never ask for more. If I say, you know, the salary starting is $75,000, they say thank you to the Black person. If I'm hiring a non-Black person and I say the starting salary is $75,000, they say, can we make that 80? Can we talk about that? And we have to negotiate. So I want to tell the folks in this room, particularly the Black folks, whatever you're offered, come back with a counter, because the expectation is that you're just going to take what you're given.
Thank you, Dr. Tabari. One other question for you is, according to CNBC, the future of home ownership is Latino. Latinos are the only group projected to increase home ownership 2% increase for blacks is not noticeable.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, according to CNBC, the future of homeownership is Latino. Latinos are the only group projected to increase homeownership. A 2% increase for blacks is not noticeable. This feels like a question about homeownership, obviously, in the black community. Can you speak to what the future portends for black folks in California?
Well, as we saw in the data earlier, there's a growing percentage of Latino folks in California, right? So just from numbers alone, it's going to be a higher percentage of Latino folks owning homes and so forth, because there's just more Latinos in California, period. Doesn't mean that black folks are not increasing, but when you're comparing, 100,000 increase to 20,000 increase of people, the numbers, that's what it would look like. We're never going to be on par because we're not the same in terms of percentage of people in California. And there are lots and lots, that's one of the things that Kamala is running on, right? There are lots and lots of ways that they're trying to make it so that black folks have some assistance in home ownership, and that's a lot of organizations are trying to make that their priority, particularly black-led organizations, because they know that home ownership helps generations and generations and generations of families. So it's in the works.
Thank you, Dr. Tabari. I want to recognize Assemblymember McCarty. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, welcome. The next set of questions, I want to pivot back to the caucus here. Understanding the importance of bringing our toddlers and babies, what is the vision of policies that explicitly include prenatal to 3 children and families as it relates to reparations? Like, what's the vision of policy reform and change that supports prenatal to 3 age range?
And we all have been focusing on this work. So one of the pieces that I think we need to have is making sure that we're tying particularly black women who are owners of daycare, preschools, early child care centers, that we're ensuring that they have the ability to have a living wage or retirement associated with that, that their businesses aren't decimated by broader state policy, and that our children are allowed to be taken care of by their own. And when that happens, that a woman has the ability, majority women, our representatives feel a woman has the ability to earn a living that is a thriving wage while they're taking care of our babies, and our babies are brought up in a way that ensures that they have strong women bringing them up. That for me means more investment in the prenatal to 3 early child care system. It means that we're ensuring that we're focused on a lot of the preventative care at the prenatal stage, in the early childhood years of our children, ensuring that we're actually taking advantage of programs that we're participating in already to ensure that we're accessing healthcare in a way that we are not right now. And that for me is a lot of different policies in the health space, in the education space, in the workforce development space, in the small business entrepreneurship space, to be able to make sure that that happens, and the allocation of dollars to make sure that that happens.
Well, thank you for starting this without me. You started early. Usually we start late at our work, but this started early. And this is a topic that Assemblymember Bonta and Dr. Jackson and I are working on extensively, early education. If there's 120 of us in the legislature, probably us 3 with a few others. This is our policy work. And one thing that I wanted to focus on is if you look at, just bigger than your question a little bit, if you look on, the statistics, Black Californians always last in a lot of things that are important. And access to programs, early education programs, is key. And, you look at all the research and brain research says that you want to have, better success markers in high school graduation rates, fewer high school dropouts, less incarceration, increased family income. It's early education. And we're in a tough time in the state budget, but one thing I want to build upon that is this is not just for the families, but for workforce development. Here in Sacramento, we have some operators of our pre-K and child care and after-school programs, very, very diverse, some very successful nonprofits. And we put money in the last few budgets to make these universal. That means free for everybody. So no longer can families say, we can't afford it. And the families who have been left behind, of course, these programs that they costly are Black California families. And so what we're going to start seeing is we're going to turn this money back to the general fund. And that could go in the black hole. It could end up going to corrections programs or other places that aren't really our priorities. So not only is it important for families and the kids, but really it's a great opportunity for workforce development. So, I think this is an opportunity for groups and us to look at, community organizations, nonprofits that aren't always really great at doing, the applications to the departments and, grant forms. So the technical assistance type stuff and how we can work as a community to help cities and communities get the fair share so the money doesn't go back to the state, but more importantly, serve families throughout California.
And then lastly, I would just say that there are a few things that we have to make sure, as when we're talking from, we even need to talk about, pre-birth as well, as we begin to look at the entire cycle to make sure that we're setting up our children for success. Not only do we have the recommendations, but we also have, I believe, some critical programs that we really need to focus on when we start to see the budget improve. The first thing is we need to make sure that our guaranteed income, basic income program becomes permanent. Because in that has a specific section for birthing individuals, to making sure that while someone is going through the birthing process, that they're also not living in poverty, right? Making sure they can have the healthy food that they can eat, making sure that they can have, and then there's also, we know that economics can also add stress. And so making sure that there's less stress in the household as well. And then, of course, and what my colleagues who are championing on this is we have to continue to build out our quality and diverse childcare as well. And then also, we now know how to eliminate childhood poverty. We saw it during the pandemic with the child tax credit. How do we make sure that we strengthen California's version of that so that children are not growing up in poverty also? And so there's a whole host of things that we need to continue to do and to invest in. But we have to be micro-targeted on some of the best practices, and then also making sure that we are pulling out those specific recommendations from the task force so that they are certainly a part of that as we begin to think about an increased state budget.
Well, I'm going to
Thank
ask
you.
the question again to the the governor.
I'm sorry, the governor. You talked about Assemblyman McCarty?
I'm new to California, so that's the reason I didn't know.
Okay.
My question is this: you made a statement about what's going on in California and how you're trying to make things better for Californians. Well, since I've been here, I get food stamps. And when I came here, I was getting like $11 or $20 or something, and I see Asians and Spanish people, they get all this money in food stamps and credit cards, and now you're funding them to get homes and stuff.
Right.
And where is ours?
Where is ours? There are a series of questions that I'm coming to on lineage. Can I collapse those? Is it okay for me to do that? And please, I know you have your hand up. Do you have an index card?
I do, but I just want to make a statement.
Okay.
That's it, just a
It's
real
just,
quick
we
thing.
can't keep the program going, but.
Give me
We have-
1 minute.
We have a number of, there's a lot of.
Everyone wants to make a statement.
Okay, You
Yeah.
guys are
So
talking
let's
about.
Everybody, make a
You
So
guys
let's
are
just
talking-
continue
Can I
with
just say
the,
something? Let her
and they
say
start.
it. You guys are
So
talking
please-
about childcare, daycare, and I don't want you to move on before I make a quick statement.
Go for it.
And this is, I've got my hand raised up, and thank you so much. All I want to say is, I'm a board member at Oak Park Preschool. That preschool has been there for 66 years, and our main problem is we're nonprofit, and we never get enough money to pay our workers enough money to have a living wage. So when you guys are thinking about whatever you're doing, think about the child care workers, the people that are taking care of your children, and make sure that you put money in the budget for the people that take care of your little babies.
Okay,
That's all I want to say.
No, absolutely, and just so that you know, the rate reform process is actually going on right now.
Thank
And
you.
so it's coming, we're just trying to making sure that we have the right calculation, because there's some gamesmanship on making sure that also you're being paid for the entire cost of your service,
Thank you so much.
and making sure that calculation is right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on that. You know, I always say that you can make a perfect latte at Starbucks and make $18 an hour. You can work on making a perfect human being as a toddler and make less than that. So people make rational choices. You have to pay bills, you go over and start working at Starbucks. And so we pay poverty wages, and, you know, literally the families that work in the programs are eligible income-wise for those programs. So, you know, the last few years we've been offering bills trying to increase rates, because one of the problems is we increase these slots for these child care programs, and the money goes back to the state. I'm like, what happened? Well, they can't increase the slots unless they have the workers. They can't get more workers unless you pay living wages. So this Dr. Jackson, some of our volunteers, we've authored bills, we've been pushed back on by the governor a number of times. So, you know, keep on it. And so we need to remind that this is not just babysitting. This is developing, you know, strong people. And, you know, we know the sayings about what it takes to build somebody and fix somebody. So it's mathematics 101.
And our workforce, some of them have bachelor's degrees, masters, and PhDs, and they're making $19. Yes, and so hopefully
Thank you.
everyone can hear this, and if
Thank
it
you.
comes up, say, I support the preschools.
Thank you.
For the babies.
Moving on to the next question. What steps will Prop 6 enable the CLBC to move on? Are there any immediate, aggressive, further gains that Prop 6 lines up?
What is Prop 6? Sorry.
For people who don't know, would the members be willing to articulate Prop 6?
Sure, we're talking about the involuntary servitude.
In prison.
Right, in prisons, correct.
Yeah, it basically is, what steps will Prop 6 enable the CLBC to move on? Basically, I think that there's a question about, are there any immediate, aggressive, further gains that Prop 6 lines up beyond abolition? Is there something else that is behind the strategy to move that?
Well, number one, I think it's a great opportunity that, again, there's things that directly our people care about, and the fact that we have now put something on the ballot for November to change the Constitution is actually a big deal. And so the ability to making sure that people are not being forced, right, to work to make other people rich is something that we long know that we had to dismantle. And so the fact that we got it through the process, got a supermajority to agree to get it on the ballot, is a big deal, but now it's the opportunity to making sure that we're on the ground, getting the votes that it needs to get over the top. And even through that process, the polling that is being done gives us more insights, right, on what is possible. It gives us more insights on the type of resources that it takes to continue to make moves to change and to get so much harmful things out of the state constitution as well.
I'd say that the underlying issue with, that Prop 6 is getting at is the fact that people who are incarcerated earn 16 cents an hour for the work that they do. And often they get punished and risk not being able to have parole hearings when they refuse to work. And so that is the nature of what Prop 6 is getting at, is ensuring that we approach people who are incarcerated as human beings with rights to be able to decide that they don't want to work and that they earn a living wage while they are working. So I think actually Prop 6 opens up a groundswell of other legislation to really change the carceral state and to change the condition of prison. And I think it's going to be a very critical piece to ensure that we can take further action to make sure that that happens.
Thank you.
I
So-
guarantee you, if you all
On the ballot,
get a chance to talk, it's gonna be quick and everybody gonna love what I have to say.
The consequence of disruption, the consequence of disruption is not all of these questions getting asked and answered. So I just, as long as we all adults and we understand that.
Brother, and I respect it, it's been a wonderful panel. What I'm asking for, what we're asking for, first of all, is possibly a little side short panel after the discussions at a meeting. And just to say who we are, I'm executive director of People Working Together Contractor Advisory Council. Love the presentation. I've been a contractor for 30 years. Grew up in Richmond,
Now, this ain't a
California.
question.
Didn't graduate from college.
This is an
Put
aside.
two
This is
kids
an aside.
in college, went to
You know,
UCLA.
You're not being respectful for everyone else. That is not right. And so what we're gonna do is, if we're gonna continue that, we're gonna have to adjourn. We just can't, we have to have people respect each other.
Thank you.
If you have a question, sir, we can give you an index card and like everyone else has done. So that is just not, that is not right.
Sir, I think we've allotted the time that we have to today's session.
He's got a sidebar.
All of us have the ability to visit and meet with people outside of this context, and I don't think there will be any side panels today,
I
but
think I'm making
certainly.
it productive.
No, you're not.
I'm a business. I represent businesses. and
All right, can you go to the next question?
Let's go
Marcus?
to the next question.
That's what we put people to work.
You're gonna be disruptive.
We put
The
people to
next
work.
question is
You will be escorted.
about
That's all right, I got
the
it.
context for reparations in California. As all of us know, the movement for reparations was really sparked by George Floyd's murder. Is police reform part of reparations? And if so, give some examples. And I want to just add this other piece, which is also about the family policing system, child protective services, and how Black families are disproportionately impacted by that. Are those things being thought of as part of the reparations package?
I'll take a crack at that, Mark. You know, I'm in the legislature in my last year, so I've had the opportunity to serve for 10 years, and certainly been an active member of the CLBC for these 10 years. Dr. Jackson got here in 22, right? And Assemblymember Bonta got here in 21. I will say that this work is hard. It's not easy. Just a quick reminder, I authored bills on police reform 4, 5, 6 times, and they died every year. They died after we had the Stephon Clark shooting here in Sacramento, and it wasn't until the question that summer of 2020, the summer of George Floyd, were the windows open, because we were always pushing these issues. We pushed ACA 6 before it was ACA 6, and we always came short. And it's not us, it's other members of other seats who don't have, you know, maybe as loud and active Black populations who push on these issues. So it did take that window for many things to happen. That summer of 2020, we had multiple police reform measures passed. I was able to put on the ballot for the first time restoring voter rights for individuals incarcerated. And I tried that multiple years. And a month after, hold on a second. I'm trying to paint a picture here. So the month after George Floyd died, a few members said, you know what, I voted against your bill multiple times on letting people vote after they're on parole. And times have changed. So that opened up multiple bills on independent investigations, opened up bills to getting ethnic studies passed, which we thought wasn't super controversial. It opened up an opportunity to go back to the ballot and revisit Prop 209, which we did. That failed. We're looking at other ways you can do as well. And that same summer, we were able to convince the legislature and the governor to start the process of looking at reparations. So that was Dr. Weber's bill during that year. So it started, it opened up the dialogue. And it's not easy. And I know that, change is not easy. It's hard to get these bills passed. But the question was, what's coming about this reparations package? I think reparations and multiple other policy changes happened during this time window, and we just started to push it forward. And because of that, we're here today. We're here 4 years later. We commissioned an amazing report with 1,000 recommendations. We're starting to chip away. We're going to get, I think, 10 to 12 signed by the governor in a couple days. Not the big ones, but we're getting, we're not hitting the home run today. We're hitting singles and doubles. And most importantly, we're going to be at this for a number of years, well after I leave, and frankly, probably after these two distinguished individuals leave too. So we did start this process, and police reform measures were part of that process, were before, but it kind of goes to this up and downs. And what I've learned is you have to stay at it. You have to stay at it. So thank you.
Thank you. Last question here. There's a question about trust, and this is one that I think cuts both ways, where some community members have felt like there's been a breach of trust, and there has been, I would say, also attacks that community members have levied against lawmakers. Per my statement earlier, I believe that we need each other in order to be able to advance any sort of reparative agenda. Where do we go from here in terms of building that trust? How do we get to a place where community members, lawmakers are able to work together comprehensively around solutions that move us forward?
Well, I think number one, this is why we have proactively made sure that we did the State of Black California, where we're actually going out to communities so that people don't have to come to Sacramento to be able to have their voices heard, and that they can give us input on that gives us a better indication on what are the hopes and aspirations of our people on the ground, and that we can make sure that we're looking at that as we're deliberating on what the next bill packages are going to be. I think that also open communication throughout the year is also important, and particularly making sure that you know who your state legislators are, and making sure you're communicating with them also. Now, even though we're all members of the California Legislative Black Caucus, it's also important to know that I actually represent people back home too. My votes, what I introduce, and all those things are also going to be reflective of them as well. So you better believe if my people in my district are asking you to do something, then you better believe I'm going to take that seriously. You're going to believe I'm going to be meeting with them also. But also, I think what's also important is to think about how can we make each other successful also, right? How do we make sure that we are speaking with one voice? How do we make sure that even amongst our disagreements, right, that we're not tearing each other down? Because we have plenty of people that do that every day, do that, right? You have plenty of people in the community who are always trying to discredit your voice and weaken your voice and all that stuff. And so we've got to make sure that we're not doing that to each other. That is movement 101 in terms of how we're going to make sure that we get this done, right? And so there's no doubt we're going to always have disagreements in terms of tactics, in terms of how fast we go, or how big we go from one year to the next. But we all have the same North Star, right? And it's going to take us all working together to be able to get there. But one thing is for sure, right? And that is that if we have people who are threatening to go to people's houses and doing all those type of things, then that's also not productive as well. And so we have got to continue to communicate. There's never been a time where I've denied trying to be able to meet with people and give them some insights on what we're trying to do, what does the political landscape look like. But one thing is for sure is that we've got to all head in the right direction, and even amongst our disagreements, right, we have got to help each other be successful. Because if we're not successful, and what I mean by successful is continuing to get these recommendations across the finish line.
So in other words, what McCarthy just stated is that it's going to take time to pass all those bills and the
But I couldn't say
Is that
anything.
what you said?
I was.
No, we're gonna.
But you,
Listen,
I will, so yes, I think,
Is that, I'm
We're
trying
gonna keep.
I will say,
I'm trying to understand.
one of the things I already shared was my belief around where we had confusion and frustration was that we were not aligned from the get-go around what it would take to be able to pass policies that related to 115 recommendations.
Okay,
So we were always very clear as a caucus that this is going to be a multi-year effort, and it's going to require some building blocks in order to be able to do that. I actually do think that a building block starting with the requirement to acknowledge the need for reparations and demand an apology is a very, very strong building block, and that is happening this year. Now, again, not alignment around the things that followed after that. We were not on the same page. So how do we build trust? Let's try to get on the same page. Generally speaking, when people are yelling at me and don't give me an opportunity to speak, or don't give me an opportunity to listen, it's really hard to build trust. So I'll take the
You're an elected
yells.
official.
I'll take the yells.
You're an elected official.
What is that?
I'm an elected official.
That's part of the job.
She's a person.
Part of the job.
That doesn't mean anything.
Part of the job is you hear from the public. Even when you don't want to hear.
Oh, no, I want to hear from the public. I do hear from the public. I was born and raised in the Bronx, and I represent Oakland. I'm not being defensive. I'm very comfortable. I'm very clear and very capable of having a loud conversation.
So this is part of.
Of having a loud conversation.
Yeah,
I'm
we
just asking.
we're gonna go ahead and abridge the
We
program.
are not aligned on no
We're gonna go
apology.
ahead and conclude the
That ain't no
program.
reparations. An apology is not reparations.
Maybe.
And it's not
Okay,
a bill.
so
There are 115 recommendations.
We're gonna take a break. We're gonna take a break.
Ma'am, well, I
We
don't
had an
understand. I
opportunity, we had an
want to
opportunity
answer
for
a
Q&A.
question.
We had an opportunity for Q&A. I mentioned earlier that the disruptions get us to a point where we can't get all the questions asked and answered. There is a consequence, y'all. There is a consequence. So the consequence is that we're gonna take a break before we segue to the next part of the program. We do have a poll that we would love for you all to participate in. We have a QR code that'll be on the screen in just a second here.